The court calls a black woman a fraud, unaware she holds the highest clearance in the CIA. Dr. Cortez, is it true you falsified your credentials? The question hung in the air as cameras flashed, reporters closing in, but Lina Cortez didn't flinch. The prosecution called her a fraud. The media painted her as a liar. No past, no records, no proof of who she really was. But what if the truth was far more dangerous? What if her identity wasn't fake, but classified? Stay with me because this case is about to unravel in ways no one expected. Lightning streaked the horizon as dawn broke over Washington, D.C., flickering in and out of thick storm clouds. Rain pattered on the courthouse steps, dotting the imposing stone archways with dark circles that glistened beneath the overhead lights. Even at this early hour, dozens of reporters had assembled, microphones in hand, eyes flitting anxiously toward the building's main entrance. Some sipped coffee, others exchanged snippets of whispered speculation. Everyone there knew that this was no ordinary trial. The charges were extraordinary, the implications enormous. Front-page headlines from that morning screamed in bold black type. Fraud case shocks the Capitol. Mysterious woman on trial. Inside the heavy oak doors, the courthouse bustled with frantic energy. Clerks marched the halls, guiding nervous witnesses to their designated rooms. Attorneys in crisply pressed suits murmured last-minute strategies to one another. The clack of heels on the polished marble floor echoed from every direction, creating a cacophonous overture to the day's imminent legal drama. That drama had a name, Dr. Lina Cortez. At first glance, Lina Cortez didn't appear to be a figure worthy of such an uproar. She was neither flamboyant nor soft-spoken. In fact, everything about her suggested a quiet confidence. Standing just under 5.5 feet tall, she possessed an unassuming grace. Her dark, smooth complexion and regal posture hinted at an internal strength not easily rattled. She stepped out of a black sedan at precisely 7:50 a.m., accompanied only by her lawyer, Clarice Martel. Raindrops fell gently on her polished black shoes and rolled off the shoulders of her tailored navy blue jacket. Her hair was styled into a neat twist, and her face bore no trace of makeup aside from a subtle gloss on her lips. Even in the gloom of the stormy morning, Lina's eyes shone determined and focused. There was a gravitas about her that was felt more than seen. As soon as she emerged, a flurry of camera shutters erupted, microphones thrust forward like hungry mouths searching for a statement, for any reaction. If Lina was fazed by the media frenzy, she gave no sign. Instead, she raised her chin and glided up the steps toward the courthouse, ignoring the questions hurled her way. Dr. Cortez, is it true you falsified your credentials? Dr. Cortez, why are you refusing to talk about your background? Are the rumors about a double life accurate? Clarice Martel did her best to deflect the onslaught, issuing a practiced no comment with each step. The two disappeared inside, leaving the reporters to gossip among themselves, capturing side commentary and any scrap of rumor they could snatch. No one yet understood just how seismic the day's revelations would be. No one except perhaps Lina herself. Courtroom 4B was already crowded by the time Lina and Clarice slipped inside. The walls were carved with ornate wooden panels, giving the room a dignified, almost intimidating air. The gallery was packed. Spectators, curious civilians, media representatives who managed to secure seats, and even a handful of Lina's acquaintances. She spotted a few familiar faces, old college classmates, distant relatives, colleagues who had once been close. Their eyes flickered with confusion or betrayal. Her trial had drawn them like moths to the flame. At the front of the courtroom sat the presiding judge, the Honorable Anthony Dresden, known for his stern rulings and no-nonsense demeanor. His salt and pepper hair was combed neatly, and he peered down at the papers before him through rimless glasses. To his left and right, the American flag and the state flag stood like silent sentinels overshadowing the judge's bench. Dresden's face revealed neither sympathy nor hostility. It was the face of a man prepared to let the facts speak for themselves. The prosecution's table was on the left, stacked high with files, labeled folders, and manila envelopes. A tall, wiry man in a dark suit, Assistant District Attorney Simon Vance, sat with an air of measured confidence. Vance's broad shoulders and sharp stare communicated that he relished high-profile cases, the kind that could catapult a lawyer's career to the next level. His expression was calm, but Lena could sense the undercurrent of ambition stirring behind his eyes. The defense table was on the right, but aside from a few organized files, Lena and Clarice brought far less material. Though unspoken, the asymmetry implied a daunting uphill battle. With Lena's silence on her own background, their evidence had been limited. All they could do was rely on the labyrinth of classified truths Lena kept hidden, truths that could not easily be unveiled in a public court without incurring huge risks. Lena and Clarice quietly took their seats. Clarice quickly leaned over. "How are you?" she whispered, studying Lena's face. Lena flashed a tight but reassuring smile. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice barely audible. Beneath her calm exterior, however, her mind churned with the weight of decisions to be made. Could she reveal even a fraction of what she truly was? Would it jeopardize national security? Or would it mean prison time if she kept silent? She swallowed these anxieties as the clerk called the court to order. Everyone rose, Lena included, as Judge Dresden entered. He settled in, made sure all were seated, and then surveyed the courtroom with deliberate slowness. "In the matter of the District of Columbia versus Dr. Lena Cortez," he began, his voice echoing off the polished wooden surfaces, "we will begin proceedings today to address allegations of fraud, misrepresentation, and falsification of credentials." A murmur swept the room, quickly silenced by the clerk's pointed glance. The stage was set. The day's revelations would soon begin. At precisely 8:30 a.m., Assistant District Attorney Simon Vance stood to present the prosecution's opening statement. He paused a moment, letting the gravity of the silence fall over the gallery. "Your Honor," Vance began, turning to face Judge Dresden, "ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we stand here to examine charges of fraud and deliberate misrepresentation perpetrated by Dr. Lena Cortez. We have evidence showing that Dr. Cortez has systematically lied about her professional history, her academic degrees, and her very identity." A collective intake of breath resonated across the gallery. Lena locked her gaze on Vance, her posture unmoving. Inside, she struggled to manage the indignation stirring in her chest. Vance continued, "This is not a simple oversight or administrative error. We allege that Dr. Cortez claims advanced degrees from institutions that have no record of her enrollment. She purports to have held significant positions at research foundations that do not even appear in official databases. The question is not whether Dr. Cortez lied. The question is why. What does she have to hide?" Clarice stood to object, but Vance pressed on, unflustered. "We will show through documented testimony, expert witnesses, and direct evidence that Dr. Lena Cortez constructed an elaborate web of deception. The defense may claim it is a matter of national security," he said, adding a slight sneer for dramatic effect. "But this is just a smokescreen. By the end of this trial, we expect a guilty verdict that will remind everyone no one is above the law." He took his seat. The room fell still, and the judge turned to Clarice with expectant eyes. Her opening statement would have to counter the dramatic entrance of the prosecution. Clarice stepped to the podium, cleared her throat, and addressed the jury. "Members of the jury," she began, "this case is more complicated than it appears. We intend to prove Dr. Cortez is not the fraud the prosecution claims. The alleged holes in her background are not due to deceit or forgery. They are the result of her extensive service in a capacity that remains, for the most part, classified. We'll demonstrate that many of the so-called discrepancies are in fact by design, measures to protect Dr. Cortez's safety and the safety of ongoing national interests." Soft murmurs spread across the gallery. The claim was bold, especially given Lena's refusal to elaborate on her background outside closed chambers. Could her life truly be so secret that not even a partial confirmation was allowed? Clarice added, "We understand the prosecution feels it has ironclad evidence, but we will show that the absence of records is not proof of wrongdoing. It can be evidence of carefully protected information." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. "We have faith that once the truth is fully understood, this court will find Dr. Cortez not guilty of any criminal conduct." Clarice then quietly returned to her seat, placing a reassuring hand on Lena's shoulder. Lena's eyes stared straight ahead, betraying no hint of fear. Whatever happened in these next days would define the rest of her life. She clenched her hands beneath the table, praying that her silent sacrifice would not be in vain. During the mid-morning recess, the courthouse corridors buzzed with speculation. Journalists huddled together, comparing notes, analyzing the two drastically different portrayals offered by the prosecution and the defense. Some tried to piece together Lena's known history, consulting aged newspaper clippings or her limited, now scrutinized, social media posts. All told, they found very little that made sense. Behind closed doors, Lena paced in a small consultation room, a modest rectangular space featuring drab gray walls and a rectangular wooden table with plastic chairs. Clarice sat, arms folded, eyes following Lena's restless steps. "I need you to trust me," Clarice said softly, breaking the silence. "This is only the first day. There's still time to introduce evidence, to request closed sessions if necessary. The judge just has to be convinced of the legitimacy of your claims." Lena nodded absently. She spoke in a near whisper. "I understand, but there's only so much I can disclose without risking lives, mine included. I made an oath when I joined the agency." Clarice gave a slow, empathetic sigh. "I've spoken with a few contacts, Lena. They said it's nearly impossible for us to get those classified documents declassified in time. The government bureaucracy can move at a glacial pace, especially with something so sensitive." Lena's expression tightened. She'd trained for many things in her covert career: infiltration, interrogation, resistance, crisis management. But standing defenseless before a court that demanded proof of her identity was not something she'd ever prepared for. "I know," she responded, "but let's see what we can do." They returned to the courtroom, uncertain how the day's testimony would unfold, but resolved to face it head-on. Lena settled into her seat at the defense table once again, bracing herself for the parade of witnesses the prosecution had lined up. A sign of how high-profile the trial had become was in the very first witness the prosecution called, Dr. Valerie Dubois, a well-known forensic academic credentials analyst. She was reputed to be the best in her field, able to confirm or debunk a person's claimed educational background with meticulous detail. Dr. Dubois took her seat on the witness stand, smoothing her collared blouse. She adjusted her glasses and, after being sworn in, nodded at the judge. Vance wasted no time. "Dr. Dubois, could you please describe your findings about the academic records of Dr. Lena Cortez?" Dubois, carefully consulting her notes, replied, "After thorough investigation, we could find no official transcripts or enrollment records for Lena Cortez at the universities where she claims to have earned her degrees. The registrar's offices at each institution have confirmed in writing that they have no student by that name, nor by any other name we cross-referenced, attending or graduating during the relevant years." Vance gave a slow, deliberate nod. "In your professional opinion, is this indicative of administrative error?" "Administrative errors can occur," Dubois answered, "but to have zero records at multiple institutions where Dr. Cortez purportedly studied is extraordinarily unlikely. It suggests that her stated academic credentials are, at best, unverifiable. At worst, they are fabricated entirely." A ripple of unease swept through the spectators. Lena kept her composure, but inside her chest tightened. She had earned degrees, but they were hidden under the labyrinth of her official cover identities. To reveal them would require unsealing top-secret files, something the government had yet to do or might never do, especially in open court. The defense had no immediate way to challenge the thoroughness of Dubois's analysis. Clarice stood for cross-examination, offering questions that implied the existence of sealed records and special circumstances, but the academic analyst's stone-cold data was unimpeachable from a purely civilian standpoint. The second witness was a man named Marcus Dolan, who claimed to have once employed Lena at a private research foundation. He insisted that Lena had never worked at the foundation and that her name did not appear on any staff logs, payroll rosters, or project documents. "We cross-checked everything. She didn't exist in our system," Dolan declared. One after another, the prosecution's witnesses hammered home the same overarching theme. Lena's professional history could not be validated using standard procedures. To the average observer, it looked damning. Under normal circumstances, Lena might have vigorously contested each point, but those normal tools, public records, letters of recommendation, personal contacts, were not available to someone whose career was by design cloaked in secrecy. By the time the day's session concluded, The gallery was rife with speculation. Some whispered that Lena was a world-class scammer who had finally been caught. Others insisted she was some kind of hidden asset, though that viewpoint was less common and met with suspicion. Lena walked out of the courthouse that evening with her head held high, though inside she wondered just how long she could hold on to her secrets before they destroyed her life. That night, Lena stared at the ceiling from a nondescript apartment she'd rented temporarily near the courthouse. A single lamp on the bedside table cast orange light on the walls, flickering softly in the darkness. Her mind drifted to memories of her first real steps into the covert world she had dedicated her life to. Flashback. Years ago, a younger Lena Cortez found herself stepping off a bus at a rural Virginia depot. The farmland stretched in all directions, rolling hills, dense clusters of trees, and a wide open sky. This was Camp Perry, colloquially known as the Farm, the CIA's clandestine training facility. Dressed in plain workout clothes, Lena was greeted by an instructor who simply pointed to a row of identical black SUVs parked near a dirt road. Basic training was grueling. Lena recalled the pre-dawn runs that tested her endurance, the immersive language labs, the countless hours spent analyzing scenario after scenario of plausible deniability. She remembered the hush-hush nature of it all. She was told not to speak of this place or her training to anyone, under penalty of law. Their instructors repeated relentlessly that their identities must stay fluid, their backgrounds adaptable. For an intelligence officer, the hallmark of success was invisibility. Before Lena entered the Farm, she already possessed advanced degrees in international relations and cryptography, obtained through specialized government-sponsored programs where her presence was concealed behind code names. But the CIA required even more. She had to become a phantom, a ghost who moved between aliases with ease. That was how she learned to operate. That was how she would eventually rise in ranks. Present now, Lena turned onto her side, glancing at her phone. No new messages, no missed calls. She wondered if the CIA had abandoned her or if they were simply watching from a distance, ready to intervene if matters escalated beyond repair. 1,000 thoughts weighed down on her as the storm outside rattled the apartment window. Finally, she closed her eyes, letting the exhaustion of the day claim her. The next morning dawned with a calmer sky. The rain had given way to crisp sunlight, the air tangy with the aftertaste of a passing storm. Despite the improved weather, the courthouse was no less tense. In fact, the crowd had doubled as more journalists piled in, determined to seize exclusive angles on Lena's case. Inside the building, Lena sat at the defense table, hands folded tightly, as the judge took his seat. The clerk announced the start of the new session, and Vance, the prosecutor, rose with a smug expression. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls Ms. Deborah Byrne to the stand," he declared. Deborah Byrne was introduced as a background investigator who specialized in verifying the credentials of government contractors. Under oath, she walked the jury through her process of checking Lena Cortez's references for each alleged contractor role. Dr. Cortez claimed we found no supporting evidence that she served in any capacity. Either the contracting firms did not exist or they had no records of her involvement, Byrne stated, flipping through her notepad. Vance offered her a polite smile and then turned to the jury, letting the testimony resonate. Byrne's words painted Lena as a meticulous liar, someone who had methodically padded a resume to gain lucrative positions. The story was sensational, and if the defense could not provide a counter-narrative, Lena would be sunk. Clarice stood for cross-examination. She remained calm, scanning notes on her yellow legal pad. Ms. Byrne, is it not possible that records of Dr. Cortez's service exist in a secure government system, one you have no clearance to access? Byrne faltered momentarily. I suppose it's possible, but standard security procedures for contractors do not typically involve erasing public records or standard reference logs. Unless, Clarice pressed, the person in question was working in a classified capacity, correct? In which case, those references might be locked behind security clearances that even you do not possess. Vance objected to leading the witness, but the judge overruled him, somewhat intrigued. Byrne answered, "Yes, theoretically, that could happen." Clarice nodded, a slight victory, but the damage was already done in the eyes of the public. Lena's story was seemingly absent from civilian life, and the promise of a hidden, highly classified career still seemed too intangible, even far-fetched to many observers. Later that day, Lena was surprised to find her mother, Eleanor Cortez, sitting alone in the back row of the gallery. Eleanor had always been a warm woman with kind eyes and a gentle spirit, but Lena had long kept her in the dark regarding her covert work, safeguarding her from potential fallout. Now her mother's face was a mix of worry and confusion. When the court recessed for lunch, Lena approached her mother quietly. "Mom," she said softly, "you shouldn't have come." Eleanor's eyes brimmed with tears that she struggled to contain. "Baby, I had to. The entire community is talking about this, wondering how much of it is true. I tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail." Lena put a hand on her mother's shoulder, leading her to a quieter corner away from the bustling corridor. "I'm sorry. I didn't want you to worry," she whispered. In that moment, Lena looked more like a vulnerable daughter than ever before. She swallowed hard, the guilt gnawing at her. "I can't explain everything, but just know I'm not lying about who I am." Eleanor searched Lena's eyes. "Then why don't you just tell them the truth? Show them the proof? End this nonsense." The desperation in her voice was heartbreaking. Lena glanced away, hating how she had to keep the truth so heavily guarded. "It's not that simple, Mom. There are people, powerful people, who need my work to remain confidential. National security is on the line." A tear escaped down Eleanor's cheek. She dabbed it away quickly with a handkerchief. "I believe you, Lena, but I'm scared for you. I'm scared for us." Lena wrapped her arms around her mother, offering the only comfort she could, a loving embrace. She couldn't reveal more, but for that fleeting moment, the emotional distance she had maintained for years softened under the bond they shared. As the lunch break ended and they returned to the courtroom, Lena's mind was still on her mother. She wondered if there was a less destructive path, a middle ground that would protect her secrets while safeguarding her freedom. And yet, she remembered some of her operations. If those files were declassified, it would not just reveal her identity. It would expose alliances, methods, and possibly burn foreign assets. She recalled how, in the smoky back room of a cafe in Eastern Europe, she once brokered contact with a deep-cover informant, risking her own safety. The memory was vivid, the tension of waiting to see if the coded signals they exchanged would be enough to gain his trust. That operation had helped unravel a major terror cell before it struck a U.S. embassy overseas. The formal records of that mission bore a different name for Lena. Even her physical description had been blurred in official write-ups. Only a handful of top-level CIA officers were aware of her role. How could she possibly lay bare such intricately concealed facts now, simply to save herself from a fraud charge? She sighed and forced her mind back to the present, where the prosecution had just called another witness, intending to slam the final nails into Lena's coffin. Paul Norton was the star witness of the afternoon, a former co-worker from Lena's earliest days at a small Washington think tank, the Rutherford Institute for Global Policy. At least, that was the cover story Lena had used for a short period. Norton, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, approached the witness stand with the measured caution of someone torn between telling the truth and sparing an old colleague. "Mr. Norton," Vance began, "you stated in your deposition that Dr. Cortez performed tasks at the Rutherford Institute for Global Policy that seemed out of the ordinary. Could you elaborate?" Norton cleared his throat, refusing to look at Lena as he spoke. Yes, Lena, or at least that's the name she went by, arrived out of nowhere. The institute was small, focused on academic research, but Lena seemed far more intense. She asked unusual questions, delving into aspects of foreign policy that bordered on intelligence gathering. Then one day, she disappeared. HR had no record of her. The entire thing was odd. Vance leaned in. "Did you or any coworker verify her credentials at the time?" "We tried," Norton admitted. "We called the university she listed. Nothing. The phone numbers for her references led nowhere. A few of us suspected she was some sort of infiltrator, but we never imagined she was lying for personal gain. It felt more clandestine." Norton's testimony triggered excited whispers in the gallery. Vance stepped away from the podium, letting his words sink in before pivoting. "But that's speculation. What we do know is that Dr. Cortez had no legitimate work record at this institute, correct?" Norton hesitated. "In terms of official payroll or HR documents, correct. There was no record." Vance offered a thin smile of triumph. "Thank you, Mr. Norton." Clarice's cross-examination tried to highlight the possibility that Lena was placed there by a government agency, implying that the unusual tasks she performed were not for personal gain, but for official reasons. However, without concrete proof, it rang hollow to the jury's ears. Outside the courthouse, reporters hungrily ate up these revelations. The narrative shifted from Lena being a con artist to Lena being a possible government spy, but not in a flattering sense, more as a rogue operative who had overstepped legal boundaries. By the end of the day, Lena's reputation hung in precarious balance. That evening, Lena's phone buzzed. She frowned at the unrecognized number but answered anyway, stepping out onto her small apartment balcony for privacy. The cool night air brushed against her face as she lifted the phone to her ear. A deep, measured voice spoke. "Dr. Cortez? This is David Keene, Office of Security at the George Bush Center for Intelligence." A jolt of adrenaline surged through Lena. Keene was a name she'd heard whispered in the agency's corridors, a high-ranking official responsible for internal security. If he was calling her directly, it either meant she was in serious trouble or there was a lifeline. "I've been following your case," Keene continued. "It seems we have a problem." Lena closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. "That's putting it lightly, sir." A brief pause on the other end. "You have your reasons for silence, but let me assure you, you're not abandoned. The agency is working the back channels to see if we can expedite certain disclosures. But as you know, everything must go through the proper channels. We've got stakeholders with concerns about revealing operational details in open court." Lena gripped the balcony railing, her knuckles turning white. The wind rustled her hair. "So what am I supposed to do? Just stand by while they crucify me in public? I could go to prison." Keene's voice remained calm. "Trust the process for now. If it looks like you're on the verge of a guilty verdict, we'll intervene. But the agency would prefer a resolution that doesn't require us to expose ongoing operations." "I'm sorry I can't be more helpful at the moment." Lena wanted to scream in frustration, but she kept her composure. After all these years of service, after risking her life, was she truly expendable? "Understood," she said quietly, then paused. "Thank you. Hold the line a bit longer," Keene advised. "We're doing what we can." Then the line went dead. Lena stayed on the balcony for a long time, staring at the glimmering lights of the city, torn between betrayal and relief. The CIA was aware, at least. But the question lingered. Would they act in time? Word spread quickly of the new rumors linking Lena to intelligence work. In response, the prosecution filed additional motions to force Lena to reveal any government affiliations. They argued that if Lena was truly a CIA operative, then she should have official paperwork. If she couldn't produce such paperwork, it supported their fraud claims. Judge Dresden scheduled a closed-door meeting in his chambers to address the matter. Present were Lena, Clarice, Vance, and the judge himself. Dresden leaned forward, hands clasped, his piercing eyes scrutinizing Lena. "Dr. Cortez," he began, "the prosecution has raised a significant point. If you are affiliated with U.S. intelligence, you presumably have documentation to that effect, albeit classified. However, you cannot simply claim that everything is secret and expect the court to overlook potential wrongdoing. Our justice system does not function on blind trust." Clarice spoke up. "Your Honor, we've made requests to the relevant agencies, but we've been told there are national security considerations." Vance scoffed. "In other words, she's stalling. She claims to be an operative but conveniently cannot provide any proof." A flare of anger rose in Lena's chest. She wanted to lash out, to condemn Vance for his arrogance, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "I respect the court and the law. However, I have responsibilities that extend beyond myself. Revealing certain aspects of my background could place others in danger. I'm requesting more time and a secure environment in which to present my bona fides." The judge leaned back, a pensive frown crossing his face. "I'll grant a 2-day extension. If by then you cannot at least demonstrate enough evidence to warrant a classified review, I will have no choice but to proceed with the trial as is. Is that understood?" Lena's shoulders relaxed slightly. It was a small victory. "Yes, Your Honor." Vance looked displeased. The group dispersed from the judge's chambers, returning to the main courtroom for more procedural matters. But Lena felt the sands of time slipping through her fingers. 2 days to prove her identity in a way that didn't compromise national security. Was it even possible? Outside the courthouse, Lena was met with a firestorm of paparazzi. The swirl of camera flashes and shouted questions was suffocating. She bowed her head, stepping through the crowd with Clarice close behind. One question cut through the din. Lena, if you really are CIA, why won't they save you? That barb echoed in her mind. It was the question everyone was asking. Her predicament seemed to confirm the worst suspicions, that she was a liar or that she'd broken some rules so severe even the CIA wouldn't acknowledge her. The truth was far more nuanced, but nuance was lost amid sensational headlines. Back in her apartment, Lena flicked on the television out of morbid curiosity. News channels broadcast panel discussions about her trial, featuring talking heads debating the plausibility of her CIA affiliation. Terms like deep state, rogue operative, and government conspiracy were thrown around cavalierly. The trial had become a national spectacle. Scrolling through social media, Lena saw hashtags like Lena Cortez and fraud or spy trending. Memes mocked her supposed double life. Others asked pointed questions about race and systemic bias. Would a white man claiming a CIA background receive the same immediate skepticism? Lena felt a surge of mixed emotions. Anger, sadness, resignation, churning inside her. She threw her phone on the couch in frustration, longing for the simpler anonymity of her past missions, wishing she could slip into an alias and vanish. But this fight was unavoidable. If she ran, she'd confirm the prosecution's narrative. If she stayed, she might destroy the secrecy she'd fought to protect. Either felt like an impossible gamble. As Lena prepared her statements for the next day, she received another unexpected phone call, this time from an undisclosed number. She answered tentatively, bracing for yet another prying reporter or an ominous threat. To her surprise, the voice belonged to Simon Vance, the very prosecutor targeting her in court. Dr. Cortez, he said in a clipped tone, I'd like to extend a plea deal before we go any further. Lena's eyebrows shot up. I'm listening. There's a lot of attention on this case. If you plead guilty to the lesser charge of perjury, we'll drop the major fraud counts. You'll likely receive probation, maybe community service. You get a slap on the wrist, and everyone can move on. A best-case scenario for you, given the evidence. Lena's jaw tightened. I'm not pleading guilty to something I didn't do. Vance's voice took on a sharper edge. The alternative is a potentially long prison sentence if we secure a conviction. You see how this is going. The so-called CIA angle isn't helping you. These next 2 days are your last window. I'm aware, she said, her heart pounding. Thank you, but no. The line disconnected abruptly. Lena slumped against the kitchen counter, exhaling shakily. The offer was tempting in a practical sense. Avoid the risk of a lengthy sentence. But it was also insulting. Accepting that deal would brand her a liar forever, tarnish her reputation, and overshadow the years of service she had truly given to her country. Outside, the night seemed to press in on her cramped apartment. Lena squared her shoulders, steeling herself. She might have no official help, but she would see this through, one way or another. The truth would come out. The next morning, Lena made her way once more to the courthouse, a swirling pit of dread in her stomach. She knew time was short for some kind of decisive intervention. As she entered the lobby, however, she was startled to see a familiar figure standing by the security checkpoint, David Keene, the CIA security official who had called her days before. He wore a conservative dark suit, and the expression on his face was one of serious resolve. Lena approached him cautiously. Mr. Keene, she greeted, her voice subdued. He nodded curtly. We've managed to obtain a sealed file that we can present to the judge. We can't disclose everything, but it should be enough to establish your legitimacy. Lena's relief was so profound it nearly buckled her knees. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, Keene cautioned. There are still major concerns about how much we're revealing, even in a sealed session. Not everyone in Langley is on board with this. And if the judge refuses a closed hearing, we may have to invoke certain privileges that could complicate your case further. Lena shook his hand. She didn't care about the bureaucracy or the political maneuvers behind the scenes. The fact that her superiors were providing any measure of support at all felt like a godsend. Together, they headed toward the corridor outside the judge's chambers, where Lena's defense team was already waiting. The prosecution eyed Keene suspiciously but followed them into the judge's private office for the scheduled meeting. Judge Dresden sat behind his desk in the cramped, wood-paneled office. With a glance at Vance and Clarice, he motioned for everyone to sit. Keene remained standing, a sealed envelope in hand, the corners marked with official CIA insignia. Dresden's tone was measured. Mr. Keene, You have some evidence to present. Keene handed over the envelope. These are top-secret documents verifying Dr. Cortez's employment history and her responsibilities within the Central Intelligence Agency. They are only to be viewed by you, Your Honor, and should remain sealed from the public record. Vance tensed. Your Honor, the prosecution objects. We have no opportunity to review these documents ourselves. Keene's jaw tightened. Their classification is top secret SCI. Under no circumstances can these documents be made available for public or general prosecutorial review. They are eyes only for those with the appropriate clearance. Your Honor may confirm their validity, but the content cannot be disseminated. Judge Dresden glanced at Lena, studying her for a moment. Then he carefully opened the envelope. His eyes scanned the first page. As he turned each page, the color seemed to drain from his face. It was as though he'd glimpsed a hidden world he never suspected could exist. Every so often, he exhaled sharply or furrowed his brow. When he finally looked up, he cleared his throat. I see. Mr. Keene, these materials, they appear authentic. They corroborate certain claims made by the defense. I assume you can verify them. Yes, Your Honor, Keene said. I certify that Dr. Lena Cortez holds one of the highest security clearances in the agency and has served with distinction in multiple critical operations. The judge lowered the file. I'm going to need time to consider how to proceed. The question remains whether we can use this information in open court without jeopardizing national security. For now, I'm inclined to call a recess while I consult with appropriate channels. Vance looked livid. But Your Honor, the prosecution hasn't been allowed to see. Dresden cut him off with an uncharacteristically stern glance. That's enough, Mr. Vance. Until I determine a protocol for handling classified material in these proceedings, you will not have access. Lena felt a wave of relief wash over her. Perhaps, at last, the tide was turning. She gave a small nod of gratitude to Keene, who responded with a barely perceptible tilt of his head. They had only opened a crack in the wall of secrecy, but it might be just enough to save her. Word leaked out almost immediately that the judge had been handed a top-secret CIA file on Lena Cortez. By the time the afternoon session commenced in the main courtroom, rumors ran wild. The gallery was at capacity, with some people standing in the back for lack of seats. Judge Dresden returned to the bench, face taut with internal conflict. I have received information relevant to this case that is classified at the highest levels. I am weighing a motion from the defense to restrict certain disclosures in the interest of national security. Therefore, I order an immediate recess until tomorrow, during which I will confer with relevant federal agencies to determine how to proceed. Pandemonium broke out in the gallery. Reporters sprang to their feet, shouting questions. Some spectators craned their necks, trying to get a glimpse of Lena, who sat calmly at the defense table. The clerk called repeatedly for order until the judge abruptly left the bench. Vance muttered a curse under his breath, shoving documents into his briefcase. He cast Lena a glare that bristled with resentment. She met his gaze with unwavering steadiness. For all the scorn and skepticism she'd endured, Lena now had at least part of the weight of the CIA behind her. Whether it was enough remained to be seen. Unbeknownst to Lena, Vance's office was in a state of near chaos that evening. As soon as the judge announced the recess, Vance retreated to the district attorney's headquarters with half a dozen junior attorneys. They pored over every piece of evidence they had, every witness statement, every shred of rumor. How is it possible that she's CIA and no one in our office had any clue? Vance snarled, slamming a file down on the conference table. One of his junior lawyers, a woman named Monica Chun, spoke hesitantly. It might be that her records are so highly classified that normal background checks wouldn't reveal anything. The CIA can do that, especially for deep cover operatives. Vance shook his head, refusing to yield. Could the agency be forging documents to protect her? Is this all a smokescreen? Chun gave him a cautious shrug. I suppose it's possible, but forging official intelligence documents is a major felony. They wouldn't risk it just to save one operative, would they? Vance paced the conference room floor. The cynicism that had fueled his approach to the case was now overshadowed by uncertainty. We can't back down now. If we lose, my career is over. We have to push forward, highlight every inconsistency we can. If we can't dispute the CIA angle directly, maybe we can prove she abused her position somehow. The team resumed their frantic work, but an undercurrent of doubt now undermined the confidence Vance once displayed in court. For the first time, he realized that Lina Cortez might be telling the truth and that he might be attacking a legitimate national hero. Meanwhile, Lina returned home exhausted but cautiously optimistic. She couldn't be sure how the judge would decide, but at least the truth was out there, validated by a high-ranking CIA official. For the first time since this ordeal began, she felt a flicker of hope. Before bed, she checked her voicemail. There was one message, a trembling voice she instantly recognized as her mother's. "Lina, I saw the news about the judge getting some file from the CIA. Does that mean you're going to be okay? Call me back when you can. I love you." Lina swallowed the lump in her throat, overwhelmed by her mother's support. She dialed Eleanor's number. When the call connected, Lina tried to sound calm, but emotion seeped into her words. "Hi, Mom. I think I'm going to be fine. Maybe better than fine." "Oh, Lina." Eleanor's sigh of relief was audible. "I've been worried sick. The neighborhood is talking about nothing else. But you know what? Most of them say they hope you win. You got a lot of folks pulling for you." "Thank you," Lina murmured, feeling the warmth of her mother's comfort. They chatted a while longer about everyday things. Family, the house, Eleanor's health. When Lina finally hung up, she felt lighter. The storm clouds hadn't cleared entirely, but she could see a patch of blue sky breaking through. The following day, the courtroom was sealed off for a special in-camera session, meaning the press and public were barred. Only the judge, Lina, Clarice, Vance, and a select representative from the Department of Justice remained present. Even the court stenographer was replaced by someone with a higher security clearance, ensuring that the transcript of this meeting would be stored in a classified vault. Judge Dresden wore a solemn expression. "Dr. Cortez, Mr. Keene has submitted a request to present more detailed evidence of your CIA tenure, subject to secrecy protocols. However, it is unusual, unprecedented really, for a local court to handle matters of such high classification." Keene, seated next to Lina, spoke clearly. "Yes, Your Honor. The agency acknowledges that Dr. Cortez served in critical roles. We can confirm she was placed in covert positions across multiple civilian organizations as part of her official duties. These covers were established by the agency and remain sensitive. Disclosing them publicly would compromise ongoing operations and endanger U.S. personnel as well as foreign assets." Judge Dresden turned to the Department of Justice representative, an older woman with stern eyes. "Do you concur with this assessment?" She nodded. "We have verified the authenticity of the materials, Your Honor. Dr. Cortez's record is classified for good reason." Vance rubbed his forehead, frustration evident. "Your Honor, this is precisely the problem. If all these records are sealed, how does the prosecution proceed? We can't possibly cross-examine the accuracy of these allegations if they remain locked away." Dresden considered Vance's position. "Under normal circumstances, you'd be right, Mr. Vance. But national security interests can supersede the standard discovery rules." Vance shook his head. "So we're at a stalemate." Clarice saw her opening. "Not necessarily. We propose that Your Honor review the classified material in its entirety, confirm that Dr. Cortez's identity is not fraudulent, and that any anomalies in her publicly available records result from necessary CIA operations. Then you can issue a directive to dismiss the charges, or at least the charges related to fraud and identity misrepresentation. The prosecution can continue with any allegations not covered by the classification." A tense hush fell over the room. The judge tapped his pen on the desk, lost in thought. Finally, Dresden spoke. "I will examine the classified file thoroughly. However, I must also ensure there is no evidence of wrongdoing on Dr. Cortez's part, no personal enrichment or espionage beyond agency mandates. If I find nothing amiss, I will strongly consider the motion to dismiss." Relief radiated through Lina. At least the judge was willing to entertain the possibility. At the same time, an undercurrent of anxiety ran through her. Her entire career, all the secret missions and delicate tasks she had performed, lay in these documents. Would there be anything in her file that a judge might misinterpret as wrongdoing? They adjourned, the path forward uncertain but hopeful. After a frenetic night of behind-the-scenes consultations, the judge summoned all parties to reconvene in open court the next morning. The gallery was once again packed, with tension so thick it seemed almost a physical presence. Judge Dresden cleared his throat, looking uncharacteristically tired. Having reviewed the classified materials submitted by Mr. Keene, and after conferring with the Department of Justice, I find that significant portions of Dr. Lina Cortez's background are in fact verifiably classified. The documents indicate she has operated under multiple cover identities on behalf of the CIA. As such, many of the so-called discrepancies in her resume are not fraudulent, but are official, albeit covert, components of her service. A murmur of surprise and disbelief rippled through the courtroom. Camera shutters clicked rapidly. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads. Dresden continued, shooting a stern look toward the prosecution. Therefore, the court finds the prosecution's primary accusations of fraud and misrepresentation to be unsupported, given the newly acknowledged classified status of Dr. Cortez's records. These charges are hereby dismissed. Lina's heart soared. A slight smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, though she tried to maintain composure. Vance stood, face flushed. Your Honor, this is extraordinary. The prosecution has not been allowed to examine these documents. How can we be sure there's no wrongdoing that's merely being concealed under the guise of classified status? Dresden responded with measured gravity. I have personally examined the materials, Mr. Vance. While I cannot disclose their contents, I can assure you that they corroborate Dr. Cortez's legitimate government service. The case is effectively closed unless you can produce evidence unrelated to her CIA role that would stand up to scrutiny. Vance glowered. He had no such evidence. His entire case had hinged on the assumption that Lina was lying. He turned to face the gallery, then shot a resentful glare at Lina and her defense team. Picking up his briefcase, he strode out in silence. A hush of astonishment lingered as Lina processed the judge's words. She was free from the weight of the accusations, free to reclaim her life. Yet the knowledge of her true identity would remain sealed, a quiet footnote in the annals of classified documents. The courthouse erupted in a frenzy as Lina, Clarice, and Keen stepped out. Reporters clamored for statements. Microphones were thrust forward, camera lights blinding. Keen, with a polite but firm wave of his hand, steered Lina away from the crowd. Clarice, seeing an opportunity to salvage Lina's public image, paused briefly. All charges have been dismissed, she announced. Dr. Cortez has been fully exonerated. The court recognized her history of classified service to our country. That's all we can say for now. The news anchors pivoted from portraying Lina as a con artist to hailing her potential status as a secret operative. Pundits who had doubted her existence as anything other than a fraud now speculated about the mission she might have undertaken. Social media lit up with hashtags of support. Cortez vindicated, as a hero, and Lina Cortez truth. Behind this public spectacle, Lina was simply glad to be free from the oppressive weight of false accusations. Keen escorted her to a black SUV waiting at the curb. It had government plates and tinted windows that gleamed under the morning sun. Thank you, she told him as she slid into the back seat. I won't forget what you did. Keen gave a curt nod. Your service record speaks for itself, Cortez. I just did what was necessary. With that, the door shut. The vehicle eased away from the curb, leaving behind the throngs of reporters and the courthouse that had so nearly been her downfall. In the weeks that followed, the backlash against those who had fervently prosecuted Lina grew intense. Simon Vance found himself under investigation for prosecutorial misconduct. Allegations emerged that he'd withheld exculpatory evidence, certain tips that hinted at Lina's possible government ties. As details surfaced, Vance's ambition-laden career began to crumble. Public opinion condemned him, calling him overzealous, even borderline vindictive. Marcus Dolan, the man who testified that Lina never worked at his research foundation, lost key clients after Lina's defenders revealed inconsistencies in his own business practices. A cloud of suspicion hung over him. The same was true for some so-called expert witnesses, who found their reputations tarnished by association with a case widely decried as a rush to judgment motivated by sensationalist headlines. On social media, mainstream news outlets that had labeled Lina a scammer of the century faced backlash and demands for accountability. Some published retractions or clarifications, but the damage to their credibility was done. Lina, for her part, tried to tune out the drama. She was thankful for justice, but she had no interest in schadenfreude. Once the furor died down, Lina returned to a semblance of normalcy. The CIA insisted she remain on the payroll, albeit in a less field-intensive role for the time being. She was offered a position at Langley that involved high-level analysis of foreign intelligence, a job that leveraged her skills but kept her out of the public eye. One afternoon, Lena drove out to the George Bush Center for Intelligence in Langley, Virginia, for a brief meeting with some top brass. It was an unremarkable building from the outside, gray concrete, large windows. But behind those walls, some of the nation's most sensitive secrets were stored. As she passed through security checkpoints, Lena felt a sense of coming home. She swiped her clearance badge, a new one reflecting her rightful status, and walked the corridors she knew so well. Keene greeted her outside a conference room. "Welcome back, Cortez." She offered a polite smile. "It's good to be back." Inside, she briefed a small team on her specialized knowledge regarding certain hotspots overseas, gleaned from her years of covert ops. As she spoke, Lena realized how comfortable she felt in this environment, how fulfilling it was to be part of something greater than herself. When the meeting ended, a senior officer, someone Lena recognized from a distance but had never spoken to directly, approached her. "I read the transcripts of your trial. Glad you made it through." He paused, then added with sincere respect, "You did the agency proud." Lena nodded, humility in her eyes. "Thank you, sir. I'm just doing my job." Outside of her CIA responsibilities, Lena received invitations from universities and think tanks, each hoping she would speak on government service or resilience under legal scrutiny. She turned down most offers, still wary of any spotlight. But eventually, she accepted an invitation from Georgetown University to give a private lecture on the complexities of intelligence work, strictly unclassified, focusing on general principles rather than specifics. The event took place in a modest seminar room, not a grand auditorium. About 50 graduate students crowded in, eager to glean insights from someone rumored to have an extraordinary background. Lena stood at a lectern, flipping through notes. "Good evening," she began. "My name is Dr. Lena Cortez, and for many years, I served in capacities I can't fully disclose. What I can share is that intelligence work, real intelligence work, is not glamorous. It's not like the movies. It's painstaking, often thankless, and almost always shrouded in secrecy. You do it because you believe in something bigger than yourself." The students listened, rapt. Lena's voice was calm, her words thoughtful. She emphasized the ethical dilemmas inherent in covert operations, the sacrifices necessary, and the toll on personal relationships. It wasn't a motivational speech promising excitement, but a sober reflection on the costs and rewards of serving one's country in the shadows. When she finished, applause filled the room. For a moment, Lena allowed herself a quiet smile. It felt good to be heard, to share what little she could, and to be received not with skepticism, but with genuine interest and respect. That weekend, Lena visited her mother at the family home in Maryland. It was a small, cozy house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, with a well-kept lawn and flowers lining the walkway. Eleanor greeted Lena at the door with open arms, pulling her into a tight hug. "I'm proud of you," Eleanor said, ushering Lena inside. The living room smelled of fresh bread and coffee. "You did what you had to do." Lena felt tears prick at her eyes. She hadn't realized how much the emotional toll of the trial had worn her down until she was safe in her mother's home. "I'm sorry for putting you through all this," she murmured. Eleanor patted her daughter's hand. "You did nothing wrong. If anything, the rest of the world owes you an apology for not trusting you." They spent the afternoon talking about simpler things, family gossip, neighborhood news, and memories from Lena's childhood. At some point, Eleanor returned to the trial. "I never understood how you could handle it all so calmly." Lena shrugged. "Training, I guess. But it was also your support. Knowing I had something real to come back to kept me steady." Eleanor blinked back tears. "Anytime, baby. Anytime." A few days later, Lena was alone in her apartment, savoring a rare evening off, when her phone buzzed. The caller ID read restricted, a hallmark of agency communications. She pressed accept. A familiar voice spoke on the other end. "Cortez? It's Keene." Lena smiled to herself. "Good evening, Mr. Keene." There was a faint hint of anticipation in his tone. "We have a situation overseas that might benefit from your expertise. Nothing immediate, but it's on the horizon. You've gained some notoriety. The agency is willing to deploy you again, if you're up for it." Lena looked out the window at the city lights. She thought about the sacrifices, the secrets, the strain. Yet she also recalled the sense of purpose that guided her all these years.